All right, this is a little bit late, but Ole Miss is getting ready to start against Wake Forest, a potential rainy game. What is Ole Miss going to be doing about it? We have Brad Logan here. We're going to talk about that over about the next half hour or so. This is the Locked On Ole Miss Podcast.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Ole Miss Podcast. I'm your host, Steven Willis, a 10-year veteran member of the national media and a former Ole Miss staff member as well. We bring you the inside scoop on all things Ole Miss. We have Brad Logan here to handle that as well. As Ole Miss gears up for its first road trip of the season to a potentially rainy Winston-Salem to face Wake Forest, the Demon Deacons, we're talking to Brad Logan, and we're going to dive as deep as we can into this matchup and tell you everything you need to know before kickoff. We'll break down key storylines, predictions, and how the weather could impact the game. It's all coming up on Locked On Ole Miss Live tonight. We're free and available on all the podcast apps and on YouTube. So thank you very much for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen every day. And a special shout out to the insiders and everydayers. You're the ones who make this show what it is. And don't forget to find your second listen. Check out Chris Gordy at Locked On SEC. We're going to be doing some power rankings a little bit later on today. And Corey Burton and Locked On Vandy for other guest perspectives on college football, the SEC, and of course, Ole Miss. Be sure to give them a listen as well. We are joined by Brad Logan. How you doing, Brad?
I'm doing well. Another big win for Ole Miss, and we'll see what's in store this weekend. I think it's going to be really wet in Winston-Salem for sure.
Yeah, there's two little pieces of news that happened today, and one was Lane Kiffin absolutely bodied Paul Finebaum, and Barrett Lee started to talk about how Ole Miss is a better job than Florida. My first segment in tomorrow's podcast is going to be about basically the Florida job and why Lane Kiffin probably isn't leaving for anywhere, much less Florida as well. What's your read on that?
I think both of those things are true. One, Paul is looking for eyeballs and ears on the SEC network, and he's getting it. I think he's getting more kickback from Lane Kiffin than probably he's gotten from any coach before. And I think had Nick Saban be more, I don't know if vocal is the right word, or just kind of more, apparent on social media back when he was at Alabama. I mean, he just never got down and dirty with Paul, so to speak. He just allowed Paul to do what he wants. But, Paul took a couple of shots at Lane. He made it out like it was a joke to kind of cover himself. And, Lane's not a guy that forgets it. He's not a guy that forgets things. And he remembers what happens, and he files things away. And he's not going to let Paul live down, everything that he said. I immediately posted that I can't wait for SEC Nation, because every time SEC Nation comes to campus, that Thursday or Friday, Paul does his show. And he always has the coach of the home team that's hosting SEC Nation. And I will be really interested to see, number one, if SEC Nation comes for the Kentucky game. If it's not, I expect them to come to the Oklahoma game. And two, will Lane be on the podium with Paul? If that happens, what type of interaction are they going to have? Is it, at what point does it become uncomfortable? At SEC tournament, at SEC media days, it got to a point where it was kind of uncomfortable when Lane started going all in. And everybody was like, okay, what's happening here? And then Paul kind of backed out and they went to a commercial. I don't know. He absolutely bodied him today. And, I expect that probably to continue over the next couple of months.
Yeah, and tomorrow's show, we have a nice perspective from Barrett Lee, basically about the Ole Miss job and all of that as well. We play that on the show, so everybody can check that out. I'm not going to ruin it tonight, so you can check that out in the morning. Ole Miss has a water game, a rain game potentially against Wake Forest over the weekend. It's looking like it's about between a 65 and a 45% chance of rain, depending on where you sit day to night. It looks like as the game goes on, it's going to be starting to move out, but the temperature is not going to be very hot. It's artificial surface, which means the footing is liable to be pretty good. What are you thinking is going to happen in this game?
Well, I think it probably plays into the fact that Ole Miss I don't know if Lane meant to do this or not, but it's going to play into running the football. We didn't see a lot of Ulysses Bentley on Saturday, and we cannot get a gauge of what what the reasoning is behind that. Was it an injury? Is he just in the doghouse? What's going on there? We just don't know. What we do know is that Henry Parrish Jr. averaged right at 11 points some odd yards per carry, so he was really good for Ole Miss. We saw that offensive line look really good, and Reese McIntyre is not someone we had pinned at center. It was either Caleb Warren or Gerquan Scott. Both those guys have been injured. We don't know if they'll come back. Lane said at the end of the game, without prompting, that he expects 2 or 3 players to come back off of injury and play against Wake Forest. Obviously, those injuries we would think may include Scott, may include Caleb Warren, may include Key Lawrence. There are some different players that it could include. We saw Jordan Watkins come back and have a couple of catches. He played sparingly. I think that's just get him some game minutes. I think he's ready to go. You just have to be really careful with a hamstring, as everyone watching and listening knows. That's an injury you can treat really, really easily. One thing to note, yeah, you're right. There is projecting there's going to be a lot of rain on the ground. Here's the thing, though. It's a sold-out crowd, and this is a stadium that's not very big. It's about 31,000, but this is a game that the Wake Forest community, from what I've been told, has circled ever since the offseason. This is a team that beat who was it, Old Dominion to start the season? Was that
no, that was South Carolina. They beat an FCS team on like Western Carolina or something.
Yeah, okay. They beat somebody pretty handily, and then struggled down the stretch and lost to we don't know how good Virginia is, but they lost kind of the back half of that game. So it's a game to where you hope Ole Miss comes out and plays good, kind of establishes the running game, and then goes to the air. We haven't seen rain be a huge factor for Ole Miss while Jackson Dart has been the quarterback. So I don't foresee that being a huge issue. From all the projections I've seen, the rain's supposed to come in the morning, dissipate by the afternoon. So it may be a wet surface, but I think from everything I've read, the weather should be gone by kickoff. If that's the case, I don't foresee it being an issue. I think the line, Steven, 22 to 24, depending on what book you're looking at. Easily a 3-touchdown win. It's what they're projecting over in Las Vegas. So if you look at this team, you go on the road, you take care of your business, you get a true road game, you work out some kinks on the road. We heard from Princely Imani Ellen on Monday at the press availability. Ask him what things are going to be different. He says, I don't know. I've never had a true road game or a road game at all playing for Ole Miss. So they'll be able to work out some kinks, what time to eat, pregame meal, what time for stadium transportation. That's like things that you can't, you have to experience. You can't just teach that. So that will come in handy in a couple of weeks when Ole Miss travels to face South Carolina. But a couple of games before them I think we need to talk about too is what's this Kentucky game going to be like? What's the team going to be like now that they've lost to South Carolina? How's South Carolina going to be following that big win? They've got LSU coming up in a couple of days. How is Shane Beamer going to rein in those guys and make them understand we've got so many more games to go? And then this LSU game absolutely could catapult South Carolina, I can't believe I'm saying that, to maybe having a 7, 8, 9 win season. So a lot of questions will be answered by the end of the date on Saturday.
Yeah, and Kentucky has Georgia. So they desperately needed that South Carolina game. They did not show up at home. South Carolina kind of bullied them a little bit in their forward pass percentage. Honestly, what Kentucky looked like, Brad, was, do you remember when Michael Spurlock had his first start in 2004, how that went? That Kentucky game gave me so many flashbacks of that.
Yeah, it was difficult to say the least. And if you look at Carolina, where were Mark Stoops? What can he do with his team? We heard from him in his media availability when he talked about, we only play the top 4 over the next 6 weeks. And he kind of jokingly laughed or whatever. But that's why you just hit the nail on the head, why that game against Carolina was so important to be able to face a team like it can, to face a team like a Georgia coming up when you really needed to get that win against South Carolina. But you know what? Credit all in the world to Shane Beamer. He was able to get a huge win on the road. Now, all of a sudden, if they can beat LSU, which, by the way, they've got college game day coming in, they can beat LSU. That place is going to be an absolute zoo when Ole Miss comes to town. So I think if you're an Ole Miss fan, you're really rooting for LSU to go in and just really knock the socks off of South Carolina this upcoming weekend.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about that because I think their defensive end and what that atmosphere is going to be like might play a role in what's going on. But we are talking live about Wake Forest and Ole Miss on Locked On Ole Miss Live. And when we come back, we're going to talk the first road. Locked On Ole Miss fans, I want to take a moment to give you a heads up on a brand new mobile game that I think you're going to love as much as I do, Ultimate College Football HC. In this amazing game and simulation, you get to step into the shoes of a head coach and lead your college football team to glory. Can you imagine being the head coach of Ole Miss? Of course you can. If you're watching this video, you probably act like you're the head coach of Ole Miss anyway. From recruiting players, hiring coaching staffs, overseeing training camps, and handling scholarships, you control every crucial detail of your program. And it's all in your hands. Will you be able to handle the pressure? And here's what I really love. You are responsible for calling all the offensive plays during the games. Your strategy will not only determine the success of your football season, but will shape your future and legacy of your program. Ultimate College Football HC is completely free, has no ads, and is 100% playable offline. You can play on the go as you want, when you want to do it. And of course, we have a special offer for Locked On Ole Miss fans. Use promo code LOCKEDONCFB, all one word, all caps, inside the game store, and you'll receive a free boost to your program. Make sure to take advantage of this perk as it will get your team off to a great start. To download the game, just visit ultimate-cfb.com or look it up in the App Store. Ultimate College Football HC. Begin your coaching legacy today. New partner of the Ole Miss Locked On Ole Miss podcast, College Corner is your one-stop shop for all things Ole Miss. You know, game day is just around the corner, and this week fans are going to be rocking red. So head on over to College Corner and pick up your perfect game day gear. Whether you're gearing up for football, basketball, or baseball, College Corner has you covered. They're located on Sisk Avenue, right across from the new Chick-fil-A. Getting to the store is a breeze, and they have tons of parking. And for those of you out of state, no worries. Visit collegecornerstore.com where they can turn around orders lightning quick. Trust me, this just isn't a pitch. College Corner is where I get all of my Rebel gear. So visit collegecornerstore.com or stop by College Corner today. College football is back, and it's not too late to catch up before this weekend's Week 3 action. SEC, ACC, Big 10, Big 12, they're all squad shows that are being loaded for Thursday night. You can get all that information from Locked On stable of college football experts by subscribing to the Locked On College Football podcast. Who has a chance to make the playoff, what teams will cause chaos in their new conferences, everything you need to know all in one place. Be sure to follow and subscribe to the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, or Locked On College Football podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So, Brad, we mentioned that the weather is going to be a factor, and you talked about this being Princely Amon Mielen's first road game, but this is Ole Miss's first road game, and one of the things that I've talked about on my show is that the Tulane game and how that went a long way to determining the identity of last year's ball club. So when people talk about going on the road and just facing an American team or maybe playing Wake Forest on the road, it's more important than just the opponent. It's kind of how you set the mindset of what you're going to be.
Yeah, you talked about the Tulane game. That's interesting you bring that up. Ole Miss did not play well, specifically in the first, really 3 quarters of that game. Not until Michael Trigg, it was a big, third down play, and it
was a fourth down. That was fourth down.
Fourth down, okay, and then you remember Jared Ivey sacks, the Tulane quarterback runs it in, and so the game was kind of over at that point. But, yeah, it took a 50-plus yard field goal from Caleb Davis Caden Davis to really put that thing into a 2-score lead. So, I think if you look back in history proves Ole Miss did not do well in that first road game last year. So I think there's some trepidation by some, being on that first road game. But I think at the end of the day, Ole Miss just simply better than Wake Forest. They were better than Tulane. They just didn't play like it. I don't think Ole Miss will walk into that type of environment they walked into last year. I mean, it won't be that type of hostile environment. I mean, believe it or not, Tulane, they had a very ferocious student section that last year I was able to, me and John Darnell were standing in the end zone where the linemen were working up, and there was some stuff that I wouldn't repeat to anybody being said at me and John and everybody in that end zone. So I moved out pretty quick, and there were some Miller Lite bottles and cans and everything coming our way. And so that was at 10:30 in the morning. But I don't foresee that type of atmosphere in Wake Forest. I do expect a really good Ole Miss contingent to travel to Wake Forest. And quite honestly, Steven, this is a different team than last year. I mean, this is a better team than last year. And I think it's been proven that you look at the skill position players, Jackson Dart, another year in the system, the wide receiver room. You got Bentley coming back if he can get things right from last week. And you got Henry Parrish running with abandon. And, this defense is, I think, going to be exceptionally better than last year. So I think this is a situation where Ole Miss comes out to a big lead on Saturday, and I expect Ole Miss to put on the brakes in the second half once again. I think Ole Miss rolls. I think Ole Miss wins big. This is just not the team that was last year. And I think a lot of that is you've got the seasoned veterans and Joe Judge and Zach Arnett. There's not enough being talked about those two analysts, and it's kind of doing them a disservice calling them an analyst because they're so integral in both the offense and the defense for this Ole Miss team. Lane even admitted it. He threw it out there without anybody prodding about, it's one thing that Jackson comes in, he does all of the things that you have to do to be an elite quarterback. There's a reason why he's as good as he is, and Joe Judge is one of those reasons. And the same could be said about Zach Arnett and Pete Golding and how good this defense is playing right now.
It'll be interesting in this ballgame because you did mention in the first segment that Lane mentioned that two players were coming back that hadn't played this season. The assumption is that is going to be Jerquan Scott and Key Lawrence. And Jerquan Scott, a lot of people, whenever he came in, Joe Judge pointed out, it's like, hey, this guy needs to be looked at center. And he's the reason Jerquan Scott started taking some snaps. Is Jerquan Scott, do you think he is going to come back this week? If Key Lawrence going to get some action? And if so, obviously we know who Jerquan Scott is going to replace, but who will Key Lawrence replace?
I don't know. Let's go back to Jerquan Scott for a minute. I lean to he does come back. And why I do that is because you start thinking about who of significance is not playing right now that could be playing. And one of those names is Jerquan Scott. Another name is Key Lawrence, and another name is Caleb Warren. We saw Key Lawrence at the end of the game last week against Middle Tennessee State, and he actually took pictures with some of his friends. He didn't have any particular braces on anything, and he just had the jersey on. He was not dressed out. So I lean to that he may be someone that could come back. The good thing about Scott is he's a transfer out of Southern Miss, and everyone knows who he is, but he can play so many positions. With the injury bug hitting so hard right now, you've got Jeremy James. We didn't talk about him. He's, of course, out with a broken hand. He'll be out for the next couple of games. And Julius Buello filled in nicely last week. And then not to mention, you've got Diego Pounds that gave quality minutes. Micah Pettis dealt with an injury last year. He's looked really good. We've seen Jalen Williams didn't start against the first game of the year. He didn't start, and then he came in and played well last week. So it's been kind of a rotation. And frankly, I think Lane is just looking at the perfect rotation. I mean, against Furman, he played a lot of different people. Kind of whittled that down. I think he was forced to against Middle Tennessee State. But I think this week we're going to see some things kind of come together. I think this is, from what many would like to say, a get-right week. And what I mean by that is you kind of hone some things down. You try to figure out who your first 11 are going to be. On defense, I'll be honest with you, Steven, I don't think they know who their first 16
22. Yeah.
And I think it's a deal to where you're going to start with 11 and you start rotating them in. And that's a great problem to have. But I think they've got 16 to 18 people on defense that are everyday starters at most SEC programs. Offense, not so much, but they do have some people that will rotate across that offensive front. If Scott can play, I expect he will start at center, and we'll see Buello start at right guard. I really believe that.
Yes, we'll talk about that in just a second. But up next, we're talking about Ole Miss football and all its glory. We're going to be continuing to talk about Key Lawrence and Jerquan Scott. So stick around. Grab a 5-hour energy shot to stay alert to watch all your favorite games. Or if you stayed up really late to watch football, you can use a shot to get you through the day to get going. 5-Hour Energy is the brand that hardworking people like you have trusted for over 20 years to give them the alert, energized feeling they need to get through a busy, hectic day. You know where to find 5-Hour Energy shots. They're right at the cash register at every convenience store, drugstore, and grocery store just about nationwide. Stock up on money-saving multi-packs to make sure you never run out of delicious, energizing 5-Hour Energy shots. And if you go to 5hourenergy.com, that's the number 5, hourenergy.com, and get some 5-Hour Energy product today. You can use my promo code, LOCKEDONCFB, you're welcome, to receive 20% off your order. This offer is only valid until September 30th on one order, and it cannot be used with other promotions. The code is also not good for subscription orders. Go to 5hourenergy.com today. All right, Brad. So we are talking about, this is a rumor that I had, and we just kind of ran out of time in the last segment, so we're going to talk about it here, is 2 players that I heard rumors about during fall camp of high ceilings and Ole Miss playing well is Key Lawrence and Jerquan Scott. Could there be a talent infusion and a talent jump even over what we've seen so far?
I don't know. I mean, let's talk about the defense for a moment. I mean, where's he going to play? I mean, you talk about a strong safety. That's definitely an area where Ole Miss has kind of struggled. I mean, we've seen Ole Miss play 2 games, Furman, Middle Tennessee State. If there's been an issue, it's been in, the defensive backfield. And I don't know if that's – I don't think we're talking about Trey Amos, who is an elite cover corner. The question begins is, what about the other corner spot? We've got Isaiah Hamilton that's transferred in, and then you've got John Saunders Jr. I think there's some issues to be worked out there, but if Lawrence comes in and he can anchor down that strong safety, the free safety or strong safety, whatever, I think that really helps that defensive backfield. That's really the only area when we've asked Lane where some areas you could improve. Obviously, it's going to be pass, protecting the pass. And so right now I think that's definitely the spot to where you look at and see where Ole Miss can get better.
All right, looking at this game, these are the power rankings that were done by Locked On SEC, our SEC site. These are the power rankings, and I thought it was interesting because mainly I wanted to give Vanderbilt their flowers a little bit. But what out of this list surprises you?
I think Texas A&M at 12. I expected Texas A&M to be better. Now, it's week 3, so we've got some hay to put in the barn before we finish up our SEC power poll or whatever, what have you. But honestly, Stephen, Auburn at 13 doesn't surprise me. And the reason is because I don't understand why Hugh Freeze did not go to the portal and get a convincing quarterback. They're recruiting at a very high level. Auburn always recruits pretty well, but this year is really, really high level for them. I don't know, Stephen, if Hugh finishes 5-7 or 6-6, if he's allowed to come back next year, I'm very surprised, frankly, that he didn't go to the portal and get a quarterback. Everything else is kind of chalk, I think. Maybe Carolina a little high, but Oklahoma, coming in. I like Jackson Arnold a lot. I think Oklahoma is going to be a heck of a foe for Ole Miss when they come to Oxford. I think they may be a little bit better than people are giving them credit for. But right now, yeah, Auburn's really sticking out, and Texas A&M. I think there's going to be some highs and lows with the SEC for sure. And I think we'll see some highs out of A&M. I'm not so sure about Auburn right now.
Auburn, for the first time, I saw some of their media turning on Hugh Freeze after this last game to where you can see that. And one more bad loss this season, and I think we need to look at, just like you said, there's a chance he could get Harsined.
Well, you look at what happened at home. It was 21-7, and they were kind of dead in the water. And this is a game that Auburn needs to win. I don't have Auburn's schedule in front of me, but I know they have the SEC coming up. Mm-hmm. And the problem with that is, I've said it 3 times. I'll say it the 4th time. Peyton Thorne is their starting quarterback. I mean, is this a deal to where Walker White is going to be their new quarterback? He's going to be really good. It was someone that Ole Miss really wanted and felt like they may have a chance of getting committed to campus, and he committed to Hugh Freeze and to Auburn. But is it time to put him in the game? And one of the media members you were talking about, I think it was yesterday. It was at the press availability. Mm-hmm. Said, Coach, are you 100% with Peyton Thorne? And in true Hugh Freeze fashion, he took 30 seconds and finally said, I guess anything can happen. So is it a situation where we may see him? I don't know. It does not feel like Peyton Thorne is the answer for Auburn. Yeah.
You go over to Locked On Auburn and listen to Zach Blackerby, who's just the GOAT on this platform, by the way. He is completely turned on Peyton Thorne, not necessarily Hugh Freeze, because I think he understands what they're doing in recruiting and he's scared to death of that. But I think he is like right there. He is just before calling for a benching of Peyton Thorne.
Well, Steven, real quick. So they've got New Mexico coming up on Saturday. Then they'll host Arkansas. Then they host Oklahoma, at Georgia, at Missouri, at Kentucky. Host Vandy, ULM, Texas A&M at home, and at Alabama. Out of all those games, ULM and New Mexico, although they lost to New Mexico State last year, those are really the only 2 given wins. Because I'm not giving them Vandy, and I'm not giving them A&M or Alabama or Kentucky or Missouri or Georgia or Oklahoma or Arkansas.
Where's the Kentucky game?
It is in Lexington.
Ooh, okay. Yeah, I'm not – listen, and we all know about how Hugh Freeze does with Vanderbilt. We've seen that movie, and all of the New Mexico State players that beat them last year, all their best players are now playing for Vandy.
They're playing for Vandy, yeah.
Yeah, and how about the fact that Vanderbilt, they're a good team right now. They're a legitimate SEC team right now, and I'm proud for them.
I am too, and I always kind of follow that program. What's interesting for Vanderbilt is everything in the SEC, really in college football for that matter, revolves around 2 things. And Nick Saban said this on College Game Day. Revolves around culture and revolves around skill players. Right now, Clark Lee has completely invigorated the Vanderbilt program. He did so last year when they only went 2-10, but he kind of changed the program. He changed the trajectory. He's changed the culture. Now he's changed the skill positions because their running back room is much better. Cedric Alexander is a really good running back. And then, of course, Diego Pavia is the quarterback. Now, yeah. Steven, since we're now a Vanderbilt podcast, let's take a look at what Vanderbilt has in the upcoming weeks.
All right.
So Vandy is 2-0. Let's try to get Vanderbilt to 6-6 with what I'm about to read. Okay.
Okay.
At Georgia State, very winnable.
Mm-hmm.
At Missouri, not so winnable. Alabama at home. At Kentucky, very winnable. Mm-hmm. Ball State at home, very winnable. Then we get dicey. Texas at home, at Auburn.
Can you imagine if that game is for their 6th win to where they're going down there with that New Mexico State? Oh, my goodness.
That may be the game that Hugh Freeze goes.
I need that game more than air.
Okay. Come home, face South Carolina.
Yeah, and that's their other opportunity to get to a bowl game.
Not yet. At LSU, that's tough. They don't play well at Tiger Stadium. Let that last game against Tennessee be for a bowl game.
Yeah. Should be really fun.
Skill players and culture. Vanderbilt has 2 of those. I like Vanderbilt this year.
All right, Brad, what do you got going on at Logan Digital Media, Inside the Rebels, and all that stuff this week?
Well, we've got some news with our Red and Blue Crew podcast with David Johnson. We can't release it yet, but we've got some big news coming with that. I'm headed to Winston-Salem for the Wake Forest Ole Miss game, so I'm excited to bring content for that. My game I was doing the Northwest East Mississippi Community College game on the way to Memphis to the airport, and that game got washed because of the tropical storm or hurricane, whatever it is. They have moved that, so I've lost that game. So not doing anything then, and of course I'll be flying out on Friday, so no high school coverage. It's all Ole Miss and Wake, and so excited about post-game coverage for that on the Logan Media Network and, of course, the BLEAV in Ole Miss podcast.
All right, Brad. Thank you very much for coming on the show today, and we'll talk to you later, bud.
You bet.
All right. All right. Thank you for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your go-to source for Ole Miss sports information. We pride ourselves on offering the most comprehensive perspectives, which is why we're the #1 Ole Miss podcast out there, and your support means the world to us. Thank you so much for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen today. Now go check out Locked On College Football podcast. From NIL deals to never-ending conference realignment rumors, Spencer McLaughlin gets you ready for an exciting season on the gridiron. You can find the link down below to Locked On College Football in the description, so you don't even need to search. As part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And also exciting news, you can now become a Locked On Ole Miss Insider, the best and easiest way to stay updated on all things Ole Miss sports. It's a texting program that sends you notifications of everything relevant without the hassle of message boards filled with trolls. Enjoy a 14-day free trial and experience the future of college sports coverage. We're adding new perks as we grow, so do not miss out. The link is down in the description. For those watching on YouTube, thank you very much, and we'll see you tomorrow. We're going to talk about the Florida job and the Paul Finebaum feud tomorrow, so we'll see you later. Hotty toddy, everyone.